Hello and welcome back to Heard and Seen, where today we're going to be looking at the role of the album cover in the vinyl revival. We all know that there's a certain preference that many of us have for the sound of vinyl, but what is it the actual cover does for us, and what difference does that make? I'll be looking at some personal favourites, and then a bit later I'll look at some real shockers. In the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of us, in fact most of us, probably surrendered to the convenience of digital CDs and then streaming, and that really brought vinyl record sales down to very few indeed. What we lost in that digital experience really was a sense of ownership and a sense of individuality, and a connection to the music. We've really seen a reversion back to artisan products, craft beers, really nice coffee, handmade shoes, for example. And I think with vinyl records, the cover is a huge part of the experience for us. Record companies have recognised this. Some of the products being put up now are really top-notch in terms of quality. The cover really is our connection. It's what attracts us to buy a record very often. When we have the record, it's the tactile connection that we have, and when we put the record on, we can read all about it, all the work that's gone into it, who's playing on it, where it's recorded. So it really completes the experience, and it makes us feel that it's something that's ours, something that we have that not a lot of people have. I'm going to start off by looking at a really good current album that I'm enjoying, and its presentation. So this is Kiwanuka, the new Michael Kiwanuka album. It's been out a few months now, but if you take a look at this, there's a good strong image on the front. It attracts your attention on the shelf, maybe in the shop. It tells you a little bit about him. It's an attractive piece. It's tactile, beautiful, heavy cardboard. It opens up into a fantastic inner sleeve, which is a good strong image, nice warm colours. Inside you've got a picture inner sleeve with lyrics, details about where and when it was recorded and by whom. And then when you take it out of the cover, this particular one is a nice pink vinyl, which always makes it prettier on the turntable. So this is a pleasant ownership experience. This is an album that you sit and spend time with. It's a grower. It sort of hits you a little bit at a time, a little bit more at a time. And personally, I love to take this out and peruse the cover when I listen to it. Now, behind me, you'll see some of the all-time iconic album covers. Pink Floyd, The Beatles, Rolling Stones, Velvet Underground. All covers are instantly recognisable, and these have been well documented and explained. So I'm not going to run through all of those today, but I am going to pick out a few favourites. And the first of those is Marillion, script for a Jester's Tear. We're going back to the early 80s here, and these were the great revivalists of prog rock, and they were unfairly compared to Genesis, depending on how you see things, but these guys created their album covers a very consistent image, using the Jester as the focal point. It's very poetic and tragic figure. But this album focused on isolation, which is very topical right now, and life in Bedsit Land, student life. And they created these fantastic worlds with their album covers, and you can see how this opens up to create a nice big picture. And they use this to great effect through their first 4 or 5 albums. And inside the great gatefold, all the lyrics and details. So when this came out in the early 80s, while I was at school, this was out. I'd be sitting down with this and I'd be looking at this, and the music would come out and really relate to the picture. So it was a very, very strong connection to the music. It's still a favourite of mine, a great piece of music. Another one that I loved at the time, I still love, was UFO Obsession. So this was 1978, I believe this came out. I probably got into it in the early 80s. A friend of mine saw them when he was at a gig, Journey concert, I think, in San Francisco, and came back and was raving about them. And he had this album, and this is an absolute peach. Love the cover. There's a little bit of debate about why Michael Schenker, the guitar player, is the only one without the orbs in his eyes. There's a great poster that comes with this, folds right out. Nice bit of presentation, a great album, and it's done by Hipgnosis, who did a lot of the Pink Floyd stuff as well. So another favourite album cover. In the 1990s in the UK, Britpop really came out and dominated for a while, and one of the pivotal albums of that time was Definitely Maybe by Oasis. Now this cover I thought was really clever. First of all, simple photograph, so not a massive budget needed to produce it, but the angle of the photograph really puts you in the room with the band. The room that they're in could be any student house around that time, so it really made you feel that these guys could be just like us. So a really strong connection. As it turned out, of course, the Gallagher brothers are nothing like most people, but that's another story. But this particular cover, the colours are pleasing. It's a very successful cover and a very successful album. In the late 90s, I'd found myself out in Australia, in Melbourne, and with a new group of friends and a new girlfriend and so forth. And they're very much like their house music and clubbing music. And in the process, I suppose, of soaking all that up, I found this album, which is New Yorican Soul. Now, I bought this on CD, and this cover is quite iconic, but and very clever in a number of ways, which I'll come to. But I owned this on CD for a number of years, and then the CD's become a little bit scratched, and so I sorted it out on vinyl. And this is a quadruple album of fantastic New York flavours. So it's called New Yorican Soul, and it's put together by Masters at Work. And this cover is, I suppose, it's iconic or very outstanding to look at. But at the same time, it sort of reflects the feeling of a cigar box, which in turn absorbs all the sense of the Caribbean, the Latin flavours that all come through in the music. So it's called New Yorican Soul because it absorbs all of those ethnic influences of music from New York. Amazing percussion, some great beats, some great dance music, a little bit of jazz flavour. There's George Benson creeping in here, Jocelyn Brown, Roy Ayers. It is a wonderful piece of music, and the cover really sold it to me initially. And I probably wouldn't have, I suppose, taken the trouble to buy the CD in the first place if the cover hadn't appealed. So a great cover, and it opens up, there's lots of information about the people involved inside. A wonderful piece of music. If you like a little bit of diversity in your record collection and you haven't heard this, highly recommend it. But one of my favourite albums of all time, and largely found it due to the cover art. So we've seen some good examples and some of my favourites. It'd be great to know what some of your favourites are. So put in the comments field down below. But let's now look at some real shockers, some what were they thinking album covers, and some where you've bought the record despite the cover. So let's start off with Joe Cocker. So Joe Cocker's very first album, with a little help from my friends, is an absolutely fantastic album. But Joe, never one of the most photogenic men, God bless him, but this album cover is awful. It makes even him look bad. So I'm glad he got some help from his friends, because he didn't get it from the album cover. But it is a wonderful album. You know, it features Jimmy Page on guitar, Stevie Winwood on keyboards, a number of tracks, and he does really good, amazing interpretations of some classic songs. Bye Bye Blackbird, a little help from my friends, we all know. So really great album, and worth getting. This is the original Australian pressing from, I think, 1969. So that's the one example of an album cover where it's really done him no favours. The serial offender of the bad album cover is someone who really should know better, and made really good albums, made a lot of good albums through late 60s and mid 70s, and that is Rod Stewart. Now this one, Footloose and Fancy Free, you know, if you're going to have a portrait photo of someone, make it a good one. Here, you know, he just looks miserable. It's a really, really poor, boring cover. But that's just the starting point. I'm going to work backwards towards his absolute worst. Let's go to A Night on the Town. And there's a lot of poor choices made on this cover, I think. This actually has two fronts. So each side as bad as the other, unfortunately. That's a really just a mess on this side. And he looks just like a complete idiot on this side. So I think Britt Ekland apparently suggested the Bota, but it's just really an awful cover, which is a shame because it's a really, really good album. So that's A Night on the Town by Rod. And let's go back to Never a Dull Moment. Just soak that one up for a moment. I think Rod's had several dull moments in this particular cover. He looks like he's at his wit's end, and this one opens up to a gatefold. I'm not sure why they bothered, to be honest, but not a great cover, not appealing. Doesn't say much about the music at all because, again, a good album, but terrible cover, which probably put me off it from buying it for quite some time. However, Rod had saved, or not saved, his best of his worst for first. His first solo album, An Old Raincoat Won't Ever Let You Down, not a catchy title, and so many levels are wrong with the album cover. I hardly know where to start. The cover looks like a child being assaulted by a man in a raincoat, and so impressed were they with the artwork, they felt it deserved a gatefold sleeve to fully appreciate the photograph. Really nothing appealing at all about this. Washed out colours, blurred photograph. There's no element of this that makes you want to buy the album, which is a shame because it is a fantastic album. You know, he was an amazing blues singer at this time. Some great guitar work on here as well, but an appalling album cover. I can only imagine a scene in the record company when they walked in and saying, right, we've got a new product for Rod. Here it is. Look at this. Take this to market, folks. You can only imagine what they might think of for an album launch. What were they thinking is really what I'm saying about this one. In fact, when they took this to America to launch, it became a plain white cover and the title became The Rod Stewart Album. So it's a plain white cover with just the Rod Stewart album written on it, which is probably a much better option. So there you go. This, for me, is the worst album cover in my collection. Love to know if you've got anything that beats this. So that's the role of the album cover in the ownership experience for vinyl. And I've got Michael Kiwanuka on the turntable. I'm going to enjoy the cover. I'm going to read all about it as I listen to the music. And hopefully you can go and find a favourite album and read all about it. In the meantime, keep safe, keep well, and I look forward to seeing you next time.